Morning, Chris. Good morning. My favorite first named person in the room. All right. Okay. Well, I suppose we should get the show on the road. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to Bible class. Seventh commandment is up on the docket here today. So had a good time with sixth commandment last week, God's commands concerning sex. And now we go on to something different now. You shall not steal. Okay, so Exodus 20, Deuteronomy 5, you shall not steal. All right, what does this mean? We should fear and love God, that we do not take our neighbor's money or property or get it by dishonest stealing, but help him to improve and protect his property and means of income. So we want to hear what God has to say to us on this matter here this morning. Before we go into that, I found this interesting study from about 15 years ago, and I'm curious what you think about it right here. In 2008, a study was done by the American Journal of Psychology to explore shoplifting trends. I don't know the full parameters of the study, but published journal, results taken to just kind of see once how, when people who shoplifts, I think is what they were getting at with this right here. And they arrived at a conclusion after looking at the survey and study results. One of these two, based on this study done, do you think they concluded that the rich are more likely to shoplift than the poor? Or the poor were more likely to shoplift than the rich? If you had to guess, who is the more likely to shoplift, and do you maybe have a rationale as to why? Yes.
Proverbs speaks of this. The guy at the end of the book of Proverbs is asking not to be too rich and be prideful, and not to be too poor so he steals. So I think a poor person is more likely to steal because they have nothing else to do to provide for themselves.
Very good, Joe. You have sniffed out our sermon text for today. Seriously, Proverbs 30, that's our, give me neither poverty nor... He said that in Proverbs 30, verse 8, which is one of our sermon verses here today, give me neither poverty nor riches, for if you give me poverty, I may be tempted to steal and so dishonor the name of the Lord my God. That's what you had in mind, right? Okay, so to that you would say that I think that the poor are more likely to shoplift than the rich for that reason, is like I need these things to get by. Okay, yeah?
I think it's going to be the rich just because you brought the study up and you want it to be a gotcha situation.
Yeah, it's not the obvious thing. You think that's why? How dare you think of me in that way? Yeah.
A greedy heart.
I'm sorry?
A greedy heart.
A greedy art?
Yep. Basically someone who wants it and doesn't care.
So that would be lobbying for
Yeah.
you. So to that you would say like the rich are more likely to shoplift than the poor, based on that. Well, the Burkharts are very inquisitive because Joe sniffed out my sermon text and Sarah sniffed out my intentions. But I mean, so after this study, 2008, the American Journal of Psychology, the results of this concluded that the rich were more likely to shoplift than the poor. And I think this was an interesting result from this survey right here. And this was the detail given that those who make $70K or more a year shoplift 30% more than those who make $20K or less. I found that to be interesting because you would think that, this is just, maybe if we're tempted to think of the seventh commandment as something of a lower class sin, that the poor are more likely to do this than the rich, this would actually say hold on a minute. Everybody steals. Rich or poor, it doesn't seem to really matter. Joe?
A rich more than poor, it's only based on your definition of what makes you rich or poor.
So going according to this measure of if you make more than $70K a year.
In 2024, 70,000 might not put you in the rich bracket.
Right. So just going according to this study right here of 2008, 16 years ago. But at least at that time, if you just look at it at that time, you'd find this, I think, a little bit interesting, I think. And I guess the greater point that I think this would show us, and that what I'm trying to do with the Ten Commandments series, is let's not look at a commandment and say that I don't break it, because you do, and I do, right? With any one of them, I don't murder, I don't steal. We do. And it's once we really survey our hearts and see, how I have sinned against God, now we can appreciate the beauty of grace that the Lord gives to me and to you for all of our different sins. What Martin Luther had to say on this matter, I've been enjoying reading the Large Catechism while going throughout this series. And I don't know if any of you have that Book of Concord at home, or the Lutheran Confessions, and I think you can find it online too, bookofconcord.org. But to read along with the Large Catechism, it's 15 minutes for each commandment. And here's what he had to say on the seventh commandment. In short, thievery is the most common craft and the largest guild on earth. If we were to hang every thief on the gallows, especially those who do not admit it, the world would soon be empty, and there would be a shortage of both hangmen and gallows. So, there can be humor in sharing the faith, but in all seriousness, right, even those who don't admit it, and I hope to explain that more fully in our message here today, but let's get to see some of the different ways that stealing and theft and the seventh commandment are broken. Okay? Now, a couple of observations here from Exodus 22. Of course, the Old Testament laws that are given. This would have been just shortly after the Ten Commandments were given, because the Ten Commandments are recorded in Exodus 20. So now Moses is still on Sinai, still hearing commands from God. And so I'm going to read these 3 verses, and I want you to comment and observe, if we were living in those times, how would we deal with thieves? How would we deal with stealing? Let me read the verses, and keep an eye out for things that catch your eye, okay? Whoever steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it must pay back 5 head of cattle for the ox and 4 sheep for the sheep. If anyone grazes their livestock in a field or vineyard and lets them stray, and they graze in someone else's field, the offender must make restitution from the best of their own field or vineyard. If anyone gives a neighbor silver or goods for safekeeping and they are stolen from the neighbor's house, the thief, if caught, must pay back double. This is just a sampling of Old Testament stealing laws. What do you notice about how they would deal with theft? Similar to how we function in our country right now? Different from how we function in our country right now? Mel, what do you observe?
Right now, if somebody gets caught for stealing, they might get jail time, or there might be a restitution, but it's quite likely not going to be to the amount of what damage they did. And here they're paying back double more for the crimes committed.
Okay, so if somebody were to steal now, there might be restitution. But you're noticing with the restitution here, it's not 1 for 1, right? You're paying back more. Pat?
Maybe I've mentioned this before, but in our Washington State statutes, if you cross over the line cutting timber, and that's one of the reasons through my agency we define the boundaries of state lands against the private. If you cut somebody else's tree, you pay triple stumpage. That is, you pay 3 times the value the tree was worth on the stump at timber sale. So
in that regard, it would be,
3.
at least how it works for wrongfully cutting down timber, it would function similarly to this. But then to Mel's kind of thing, so some of you have been aware that, we had a burglary at church and damage was done, and so we submitted restitution. It's kind of just dollar for dollar. Like, we anticipate there was X amount of damage, so pay this. It's not, double, triple, quadruple. but it is with trees. So Bible study takeaway: don't cut down a tree unless you're really sure it's yours. Otherwise, yeah. Joe.
I think it's a lot more real punishments, because let's say somebody goes to the store and steals a pack of gum, and then they catch you, you're not gonna give them 4 packs of gum back. It's like they don't want the gum, they want the material value of it. And it's a lot more real. You steal an ox, you give back an ox. You steal a sheep, you give back more sheep. And I think that's just because their society was a lot simpler in terms of things that have a value. That they only have like a handful of different things to use as currency.
So, as I'm looking at the top verse right here, it's like, think long and hard before you steal, because if you get caught, it's always worse than if you just went about it honestly the first time, Another thing too is that suppose the mentality of a rich person is stealing at the top. It's like you will have to produce, 4 or 5 of your own cattle, or you're going to have to find it one way or another to pay it back. So again, you're coming out worse than if you did that. Yep, Lolly?
I'm thinking about the survey, the 2008 survey and stuff like that. I think all that's out the window.
I think all that's on what?
Is out the window. If you look at what's going on right now, I think if you don't steal over $1,000, you're not even picked up for shoplifting. If you can steal and walk out the door blatantly. There are 101 ways to scam somebody, and you're seeing it more and more happening. And what's the result? Well, if the bank wants to cover what they can, if they don't, they don't.
Lolly made the point. I brought up that survey a moment ago as though, maybe this is all out the window. Maybe things are different now. That very well may be true, right? 16 years of time has passed, What is the state of theft in our world right now? Do we, and this is not my arena, I don't work in law enforcement, I don't work in, I don't work for loss prevention at a store, but, how much gets stolen? Who is doing the stealing? I don't know. Have we in a society weakened on this? Okay, this is good, okay. Have we as a society just stopped caring about stealing? If you steal $10 worth of stuff, we're not going to bat an eye. So you might say the state or the country doesn't care if you steal $10 worth of stuff, but would God? Hence why, all stealing is stealing. Let's get that in mind as we talk about this here today. Yeah.
Well, Janelle's been working on security jobs for the last year or two now. And I had no idea that pretty much any business contracts with a security company to make sure people don't walk in and steal things. And they're not on the premises violations. And she said she's the one that's supposed to ask them to go back and return it. But the guy with the gun is still the one to come out and do anything. And only if the manager reports it to the police will they even come out and deal with it, which they won't even always report it.
So even if we in a society have kind of softened somewhat in how we treat theft, let's not forget how God views it and keep that always in mind and in the forefront. And I've worked retail before, so I kind of know I'm aware of the world of loss prevention. I got a little training back in the day on things to look for and stuff, right? But, there are other ways to steal than just by putting, there's other ways to steal, right? I thought this was interesting here in the middle verse that you have to make restitution from the best of your own. I thought that was interesting. You're not just giving up, here's some grapes. No, you're going to give out the best of what's yours if you're caught stealing. So think long and hard before you do this. Is it worth it? If you had to give up your best as restitution, or if you have to give up 5 times the value, you are coming out worse at the end of this than better. And as a general truth, it seems like, thievery doesn't prosper. You might get away with it for a while, but then when you take in the guilt or getting caught, you don't come out the positive as a result. So those are some interesting observations from Old Testament stealing laws. I have yet one more here from Leviticus chapter 6 as the different offerings are being laid out. If anyone sins and is unfaithful to the Lord by deceiving a neighbor about something entrusted to them or left in their care, or about something stolen, or if they cheat their neighbor, or if they find lost property and lie about it, they must return what they have stolen or taken by extortion, or what was entrusted to them, or the lost property they found. They must make restitution in full, add a fifth of the value to it, and give it all to the owner on the day they present their guilt offering. And as a penalty, they must bring the priest, that is, to the Lord their guilt offering, a ram from the flock, one without defect and of proper value. You're seeing some similarities right here as theft is being explained and talked about. In particular, you have to return what you've taken. You have to pay on top of it, like we've talked about with the Exodus verses. But then look at this addition down in here too, is that you have sinned and something needs to happen in order for your sin to be addressed. You will bring forth a sacrifice. So what is this telling me right here? It's telling me that back in the Old Testament, something would have to die because of my stealing sins. How does this apply to us, of course? Is for our stealing sins, someone had to die as well, right? How do my sins of stealing get cleansed? Someone without defect, right? Coming forth and taking my place. So there is no such thing as a victimless crime. Sure, maybe Target won't notice if I take, or maybe you won't notice if I, skimp a little off the offering plate, but, somebody is a victim of our stealing. And thanks be to God that Christ stepped forward to take that on for us, all of our sins of theft. All right? So, what are some of the key things that are at the heart of this commandment? We over some of our recent commandments, right? We talked about authority figures with the fourth. We talked about life with the fifth, marriage with the sixth, and then property. Property is one of our chief concerns here with the seventh commandment. So, if I were opening up in our catechism right here, the first word for the fifth commandment is life. The first word on the sixth commandment is marriage. And then the one for the seventh commandment here is property. So it would be good for us to talk today on this Sunday about how can we have a proper God-pleasing view of our property, our things, our treasures, our stuff. Today would be an appropriate place, the seventh commandment, to talk about that. And this is kind of why I'm bringing up the Proverbs thing in our sermon here today. Give me neither poverty nor riches. The middle is the right heart and viewpoint to have. So here's just 3 little quick biblical property truths that I want to get across here real quick. We would all agree with this here in the room, of course, like everything I have comes from God. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it. This is our Old Testament reading for today, right before they're about to enter the promised land. You may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me, but remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth. So as you go from all this wandering to riches, don't forget the Lord, which is something we ought to really be on our guard against too, ourselves as well. So keeping in this viewpoint in mind is good. Number 2, with all things, we want to be good stewards. Be it if I'm a worker, if I'm a parent, if I'm a child, if I have my thing, like if God has entrusted these things to my care and my use, I want to take care of it well. Right? So, speaking about apostleship, 1 Corinthians 4, those who have been given a trust must prove faithful. That's true in many different circumstances. You might also think of Jesus' parable of the talents. One got 5, one got 2, one got 1. They all stewarded it differently. How can we take good care of what God has given to us? And lastly, of course, here, this is true for all of these commandments 4 through 10 is when it comes to my possessions, how can I care for, love, or help my neighbor? That's a key thought here when we think of the seventh commandment. So I'll now turn it over to you. I'm going to throw up some verses here. And now we're shifting maybe a little away from stealing, a little bit more onto property with this commandment. But what are some things for us to keep in mind right here on how can we as Christians handle our stuff properly? Luke 15, Proverbs 22, I'll mention too that these are all just taken right out of our catechism layout as well. Luke 15, of course, that parable of the lost son. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided the property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. Proverbs 22 says, "One who oppresses the poor to increase his wealth, and one who gives gifts to the rich both come to poverty. Do not exploit the poor because they are poor, and do not crush the needy in court." As we take in these verses, what are some seventh commandment considerations here? How would God want us to live and behave with regard to money, property, possessions?
It basically says, remember that it's all for God, and God gave it to you, and if you have wealth, don't take from the poor, don't steal their stuff. Like when Nathan talked to David, the man who stole the one man's lamb and slaughtered him for the meal, when he had plenty already to start with.
Right, the story of
David.
you had one, right, David and Bathsheba, like you took the man's one lamb. That comes to mind here too. So to the second verse right here down on the bottom is it would be God pleasing for us to not make life harder for those who have less. The opposite of that, I suppose, is how can we help those, and how can we use our property and treasures to care for those who have less. You think of also just the various laws God put in place to care for like the foreigner and the widow wandering among you. Yeah, how we ensured that they would get fed and nourished and cared for. Very good. How about the top one, Luke 15? Was he being? How did the young man steward that inheritance? He didn't. Is there a word from the top one that catches your attention? Like just the way that he squandered? I'm hearing wastefulness is another one. I guess we could have a discussion right here, like, is it a sin for me to waste? To waste my money, to waste food, to let, and I think as Christians, we ought to, be mindful of God, if these are things that God has given to me for my usage, that I, what am I saying to God if I waste anything? This is somewhat related, somewhat not, but I've heard of, when you procrastinate, like when you waste time, you're basically expecting God to give you more time for what you could have done with your earlier time. So like if I waste money or food or that, it's like, in a way it just despises God. And so this would be one for us to keep in mind as well. As the son didn't do it well, being good stewards. Yeah.
We can probably say he has some heart issues there too, because he says, give me my share. I mean, it wasn't like he thought he was doing good things and, invested with the wrong thing, and surprisingly someone stole from him. It was, give me, and then his heart was just his own selfishness.
Yeah, so basic, and whatever you see outwardly, that is not the main thing. The main thing is the heart, as you rightly point out, and so what's going on in the heart right here is a great deal of, selfishness or earthly mindedness. Might also think as well right here, when he had all of these resources, and then what did he do? He just spent them all on himself and his pleasure and his joy. How could he have stewarded that gift differently? I mean, there's many parents and grandparents here in the room. Like if you handed over an inheritance to a child and then they immediately blew it in 2 days, like I have worked my whole life for this and you just squandered it like that. Like I imagine that would hurt. And just not sit right. And yeah. So that's another way that God can provide for us. The Catechism makes a point of talking about like how does God provide for us? The common way we think about it is like through our work and labor, also through parental oversight or caregiving of some kind. But a gift or inheritance might be another way that God takes care. That He provides. And I know like when we get gifts and things like that, we're like, ooh, what can I go spend it on? It's like, well, how can I use this gift of God to care for myself and care for others? Right? Not saying we can't have fun with it, but I think you follow where I'm going with this here. So those are a couple verses that help us getting to thinking about some seventh commandment things. These two are kind of in the same vein. Do not use dishonest standards when measuring length, weight, or quantity. The Lord detests dishonest scales, but accurate weights find favor with Him. How are these relevant to the seventh commandment? Yeah, Patty?
Maybe several Bible passages, but one where it says, don't use two separate sets of weights. One for yourself and a heavier set for when you're measuring things for other people. I can't remember where.
That's very well. Like, I don't know the one off the top of my
Yeah,
head.
I can't remember either, but it's one of the chapters.
Just-
One of the ones I read.
The first place my mind went is like, would that have something to do with this down here about, here's one scale we use for you people, and then here's another scale we use for you people. I wonder if we're getting on to something like that. Did you have something?
I was going to say, those examples are more clear examples of truly stealing, where you're saying, oh no, I did bring, you owe me for 10 pounds versus when you only brought 8, but your scale is saying, I think those are more clear-cut stealing cases, saying I need to be paid for more, but the weights really aren't there.
Yeah. And two thoughts that come to my mind as I look at this is this seems to be along the lines of why tax collecting back then was so frowned upon. It's just arbitrary. Whatever I charge you, you owe the state three denarii, but I'm going to say 5, and then I'm going to keep the 2 as a tip. Dishonesty in that kind of way. I think it's also. I wonder how commerce was different back then than it is now. I mean, if I walk into Target this afternoon, there's the barcode on the thing, every bottle of soda is $2.50. But back then, was there more of an integrity required to be like a businessman or a tradesman? I can just kind of, $2, $4, $6, not being fair in your practices. We didn't have a barcode system back then, right? Where everything's the same. So I can kind of oh, I like you, I'll charge you less. I don't like you, I'll charge you more. I'm just thinking out loud right here, but so this would be another clear case, right? Of then as now, we want to in the marketplace charge people fairly. We don't want to cheat people out of what they're getting. So, Lally?
They're fitting that. I'm watching plant world and I'm seeing ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. The plant is maybe gonna last a year, maybe it's gonna last 20 years. But I'm seeing plants that used to be 75 cents and now they're $5, and I'm thinking, is that a just increment in price, or is that a necessary thing? So I compare it with when I'm selling things for, which I'm not really a business as such. And then we go up to another place and they have the same plant, the same size, everything about it's the same, and it's 5 times more expensive. I just can't understand that.
I'm no economist, much less in the flower market, but yeah.
The flower market, I look around and I see what things are costing, and I understand transportation, I understand, taxes, economy.
So like, I just heard like gouging, if I'm gouging people for price, here is something that you need, and I'm going to, get as much as I can out of this. I certainly think that falls in a seventh commandment conversation as well, Joe.
I don't, at least from the verses you showed us and what I know from the commandments he gives us, or the commandments he gave the Israelites, that he never really talks about charging unjust prices. He talks about not charging interest on your fellow Israelites or the poor, which is fair because they need money because they're poor. But I think that when you brought up your market explanation, that it's not that charging them 10 and the next person 5 is wrong because you negotiate over the price. It's that if I say I'm charging you 10 and then I charge you 15 because I use a heavier weight, that's not okay.
Right. So, I think we could have a conversation here too about supply and demand. Like, I'm free to ask whatever. If I'm selling something, I'm free. If I'm selling my guitar, I can ask whatever I want for it. And if you are willing to pay that price, we fairly negotiated on the deal, right? Whereas, let's say I sell water, and we are in a drought right now, and now my water, which I normally charge $0.25 for, I'm going to charge $5 for. Maybe we can have a conversation, to that end right here. So, if two people are agreeable on a price, I don't think to me that's a seventh commandment breaking. We negotiated where I'm okay to pay $1,000 for this, you are too. If that's what it's worth, that's what it's worth. I mean, if people want to spend 2 months' rent on Taylor Swift tickets, that's their prerogative, right? And if you're willing to pay that, okay. But I think we're getting here about, if you're charging $2,000 for front row Taylor Swift tickets, and then that was the parking pass, you cheated me out of, right? That was a dishonest deal. So scamming here, we could have a conversation here, comes into the mix as well. Absolutely. I think that's a more modern day kind of thing to go along with this here. Yeah?
The problem with those examples is that you're just lying. That's less about the finances of it, more that you lied when you did that. I think that's what makes those wrong.
If it's in more 8th commandment than 7th commandment?
It doesn't really matter. I'm just saying that it's because you lied when you told them what you were giving them.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting in the Proverbs 30. Agur says, "Lord, give me these 2 things: keep poverty keep falsehood and lies far from me. Number 2, give me neither poverty nor riches." It seems like there was a close correlation between it seems like the 7th and 8th commandments are really closely connected, right? Because if I'm doing this, this is lying is happening in here. Not necessarily like me spreading bad things about your reputation, but they go very closely together. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we're using a big funnel to a word at the bottom that says sin. You know, stealing's wrong, lying's wrong. You know, we can all arrive at the same destination there. So, but I throw this out here as well, another way to think of this commandment. Up here too, okay? The wicked borrow and do not repay, but the righteous give generously. James 5 is James is talking to some rich oppressors. He says, look, the wages you failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. What are some other things out of these verses right here where we can consider using God's property properly, using it improperly? Theft.
Pretty much exactly what it says. So you employ someone to do work for you, and they did the work, and they spent their time and labor and effort and supplies doing it, and then you don't pay them. They don't have the money to feed their family or to whatever. It's simple.
So more to the last one right here, you know.
Look at their borrowing and not repaying, where, can I borrow money, can I borrow money, can I borrow money? And they never repay them. And it's fine, they give generously, but yeah, just, that's the.
Yeah. As a general rule in our country, in at least where we live in this country, it seems like we really like debt, you know, and racking it up, and maybe I'll pay, you know. Could we have a conversation? Might be a hard conversation, like, you know, is debt a good stewardship of God's property he gives to us? Is it a fact of the matter, like in order to live, I have to? We could maybe have that conversation here as well. But in any case, like if I am borrowing money, I ought to have it in my heart, like I am going to pay you back. If the Burkharts loan me $100, I should pay them back. And for me not to, or for me to knowingly get in this arrangement that, okay, thank you. This would be stealing, yes?
The master who had 3 servants, and he gave one a certain amount of denarius, and then another one a middle amount, and the third one a larger amount. And the middle and larger recipients of his funds that they were supposed to be stewards of while he was gone away from home, they invested and made more. They made proper use. Whereas the one who received little went and hid it in a hole and did nothing with it. And basically, as the economy grew, he lost his master's money. And he did not use time or talent to improve it, and so it was taken away. And the others who properly received the gift they were given from the master were given more.
Again, good stewardship. Something that we do well to talk about more in church is just, you know, be it our time or our health or our, you know, how can we, God has given us these things, how do we honor him in the way we take care of them? Yeah. Brighton?
It's not just, I feel like we talk a lot about money, but it's not just money we should like be, it's not just money we should be good stewards with, but like our time as well. Like, I guess this has come a lot from the job I do now. I spend a lot of time helping other people. And I find that my relationship with God has gotten closer through that.
That's a good thing.
And time in helping other people can be very important. And being a good steward of your time.
I 100% agree, right? Yeah, Skylar, do you have something to?
Yeah, on that note about time, that second one up there points out to me that a lot of these can be flipped around too. Like when it says, if you have workers that spend their time and work hard, you need to pay them, otherwise you're stealing from them. But if workers don't work hard and then they say, pay me, then they're kind of doing the opposite of what you mentioned, that they're not working as hard as they should, and yet insisting on full wages.
Yeah.
So, and then the first one there, of course, is that the righteous should, if they can't, or not the righteous, but the rich, really, if the rich could lend and they don't, then that's stealing, really. You're not giving someone else the chance to use some money they're sitting on that does you no good. They can't use it.
So everybody has a duty to the seventh commandment, right? If I'm an employer, I have a duty to my workers. Do not steal their work if you are not willing to fairly take it. Likewise, if I'm a worker, do not steal money from your employer by saying you rendered X amount of hours of faithful work, but then you didn't actually give it, right? And, when I am here from 5 to 9 p.m., I am being asked to work a faithful work to receive a set amount of money in return. For me to just sit back and text and, ignore what I should be doing, this is not God honoring in the workplace. So thank you for sharing that as well. Like, this can be flipped on its head as well. I completely agree. And that plays, I think, to the 2 Thessalonians 3, where we studied the Thessalonians books, I don't know, a year ago or something. We went through all of them together. And Paul had a lot to say in here about, like, working and, like, when we were among you, like, we worked, like, we set a good example for you. So I wonder if there was some kind of laziness or lethargy in Thessalonians, in Thessalonica. And he's like, what is a proper viewpoint of property and possessions is, God gives them to me through work, through the ability, he has given me the ability to work through which I can go and produce these things. And so if I do not have the desire to do that, if I'm capable but not doing it, then I'm not honoring God in this way. Charlie?
I had to go home and get my hearing aid, so I hope I'm not repeating something that's already been discussed.
And even if you do, repetition is the mother of learning. Go ahead.
But if you don't work hard, you're stealing from your employer too.
Yep, we totally agree. Yep. Working hard while, so, yeah. Agreed. Pat, you had something?
I was going to say right in the very first Genesis, with the story about Cain and Abel, that right away, when the best fruits were given, God was displeased. And so it starts right out early in the Bible and
Yeah, just in Cain and Abel, how Abel gave his best, Cain gave some. It's not because God is preferable towards, one type of gift over the other, but it was the heart behind it, right? To this Malachi verse, the very last book of the Old Testament is Malachi had strong things to say to God's people, talking about how you people are robbing your God in the realm of tithes and offerings. And we've talked about stealing mostly so far just between me to you and you to me, but how does this apply? Maybe like, do we rob God? I make the point every Sunday to say something about like, each one should give what they have decided in your heart to give. It's not about, thou must give X% or whatever, but it's like, the New Testament is pretty clear that God wants his people to give something. So what's going on here if I don't? Yeah.
I think it'd be very, very challenging to say that for a New Testament believer they're robbing God, because in this Malachi verse it's pretty obvious because they have the tithe, which was commanded, and the offerings were very specifically commanded. There's this type of offering for this kind of sin, this type, and so it's very obvious. Like, here is God's standard for this situation, and here's you not meeting it. And so I think unless you're being conscious stricken about that, and you know that God wants me to give this, and I'm saying no, God, I think it'd be very, very hard to apply that to a New Testament Christian.
Can I challenge you on that one? If I gave no offerings to Messiah, would you be okay with that?
Possibly. I mean, this isn't the only place to give to God. You can give
Mhm.
So it's not about how close can I get to this line without breaking it, but I think it'd be very hard to say that you are robbing God in that situation.
As like a New Testament. So New Testament, like us now today, right? We are New Testament Christians, and I might push back on that one a little bit. I look at things like each one of you. There is an element of New Testament command in the realm of giving. Less so like this. You're absolutely right in what you say about like back then it was very like this to this to this to this, but. Is there some heart stuff going on if I'm not willing to let go of my, be it at church or elsewhere, nope, it's mine. Another proverb that comes to mind, those who give to the poor lend to the Lord. So that.
I'm not saying you're giving it all.
Right.
I'm just saying that
So I'm struggling with that one a little bit, can I rob God in the New Testament age? I think so. But I'm willing to talk more about it, Melissa.
There's a verse a couple slides ago where at the end of it said the righteous give generally. Yep. And another thing I was thinking of too is I believe when new members stand up in front of church and profess their commitment, if you want to say that, I think there's something in there about vowing to support the ministry through offerings.
Will you support with your prayers, time, talents, and offerings the work our Lord has given to this congregation? So it's not just money, but it's like you are saying kind of whether you're a teen confirmand or adult confirmand, like and this is not divinely inspired, but it's saying like I want to serve the Lord in these ways. Melissa?
It's also a promise that you made. So if you're going to make a promise and say that you're going to do it now, to choose not to give, and even maybe there is something to be said for, since you made that promise to Messiah, there should be some loyalty to giving at least some portion of your offerings to God, to Messiah specifically. I don't know that it has to, but I think it's at least worth considering.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah.
just to clarify, for my point, I agree with what you guys said. What I'm trying to say is because in the Old Testament, these specific offerings were very specified. It was obvious to say when you weren't meeting those and when you're robbing God. I'm not saying that New Testament believers can't do that. I'm just saying that it's not as obvious and clear cut as it was then. It's not like if I'm not giving 10% and the specific offerings for the specific sins that are outlined, I'm clearly disobeying God in this regard. That's all I'm saying.
I would agree with that. So, if I in my heart say I want to give God 10%, 1%, 50%, I'm not robbing him because he did not lay out for me, you must give me this. Versus back then, tithes 10%, right? So, good thing. So, all's well that ends well. So, okay. One more, yes.
First, but I had a story.
Fight over.
I forget where it is, but the new believers, when the married couple, they sold the field, and the spouse brought the money to the congregation to share, to keep everybody going. They kept some of the money and didn't give it, and he died. It was in Acts.
Yeah, Acts.
So God knew their heart.
Yeah.
They did not give all to the Lord, they held back.
Acts 5, is it?
So
Yeah.
it doesn't say we have a percentage now. That's a personal thing with God and what you can afford with and you can use your time and your stewardship and then your talents besides just money, but God knows what's in your heart and He knows the talents He's given you.
Yeah. All reroutes itself to the heart, right? And to where we say, create in me a clean heart, O God, right? So, very good.
Just the same thing with the matter of the heart. When we started our Christian day school in Young, we became very aware of the fact that we were going to have a lot of non-Christians or new believers or non-believers coming in. And so one of the things they offered, and they said, if you come, we won't charge you tuition, but we would like you to give a gift if you can. And we also require that you come to a class on what your child will be learning.
Sure.
And we actually had people who came and said, well, I give. Well, what can you give them? Oh, I drive my kids to school every day. Okay? It was really a hard situation to get to the heart of the matter. But when they refused to come to the Bible class, that was when we had to draw the line. Because they had to know what their children were being taught. And hopefully it would open the door for them. But in the end, it came to the fact that out in this area, we charge tuition to almost all the Christian day schools. We didn't always do that. The Wells felt like the job of the congregation is to educate the children of the church, and I don't know if that's in Green Bay yet or not. I don't know.
Yeah.
Charge tuition.
Not having, I don't, yeah, not having sent my children that I don't have to. Yeah. Right.
All of the churches charge tuition because of the fact that the unbelievers who come don't understand the concept of giving.
So God working us all to have a heart that is eager to give from our first fruits. Thanks for sharing this. It's hard to navigate. There's a lot of challenges to navigating, a lot of this here, but we're asking God for wisdom to be discerning here. So that's what I got for this morning. I'll just say a prayer quick, and then we'll go on our way. Lord God, thank you for blessing our Bible study this morning to meditate on the seventh commandment. We confess to you, Lord, that we have sinned against this commandment through some manner of stealing, dishonesty, cheating, laziness, somewhere in there. We know, Lord, that you stepped forward to be the atoning sacrifice for our sins. Without blemish or defect, you died to cleanse us for good. In the spirit of your love, let us go forward here, and may we steal no longer in our lives. This we ask, Lord, in your name we pray.